In this lesson, we're going to learn a few tips on how to prepare contours for easy modeling. Now, the first thing that I can mention to you is that when you are preparing contour lines, you will, in most cases, have a type of contour plan that is given to you with the drawing, such as the one that we're looking at here. Now, there's certain things with this contour plan. For example, certain lines are not joined all together. Some contour plans might consist of just simple dots with height positions attached to them. Some of them will be a series of uninterconnected small segments that don't necessarily all join into one long line. So whatever scenario you are faced with, the thing that you want to remember is that you can either draw these contour lines now in AutoCAD, or you can repair them in AutoCAD, or you can also repair or recreate them in 3D Max. So you do have the choice to work with them either now or at a later stage. So most of that will depend on the scenario that you're in, and as well, it'll depend on how comfortable you are by working in either 3D or AutoCAD. In most cases, I find it much easier to work in AutoCAD so that I can get the best geometry out into 3D Max, which is already ready for modeling. I don't like to take very complex, multifaceted, small, high detail objects into 3D at all. I prefer AutoCAD to handle that because it handles very high detail and high levels of geometry much easier on this 2D scale. So the first thing that I would like to mention is that it's a good idea to decide what your end product or your end terrain mesh should be looking like. In our case, we have a relatively flat area here where the house is being built. We have quite a steep cliff going down towards the ocean, and we have the sea in this area down here. So this would be the water line where the water touches the land. So you want to already now have a good idea of where most of your cameras are going to be so that you can decide how much terrain you actually need to model up and build. If, for example, you're doing an animation and you would like to have a helicopter fly in and you really want to see things from far away, then you evidently need to have a much wider angle of terrain and geometry around you to look at. So if this is the case, then I would also recommend that you have a look at the first course that I did on Digital Tutors. You'll find it underneath my name. And this course deals with a modeling of the entire bay of Rio de Janeiro, where we look at the ocean, we look at the whole cityscape around the beach, as well as the Sugarloaf Mountain, and we basically model all of that terrain according to real contour lines. So in that case, the terrain is so large that we make it out of several panels of mesh, and we add different types of resolution of ground texture to those panels of mesh so that we have the highest resolution only where we really need to see it, where we're close to our building. So that would be the type of modeling that is best for helicopter fly-ins or those type of views. In our case, we're going to have a much smaller terrain mesh that is just going to be surrounding the house so that we can get a couple of good eye-level perspective views of the view that is from the house, as well as the view onto the front of the house where all of the glass and all the interesting parts are happening. So with all of that said and done, I can now go and draw a rectangle, so REC enter, around the area where I would like to model my terrain. So I'm going to simply draw a square which is roughly this big. And the important thing to note is that you want to have your contour lines extending just outside of this terrain boundary that you have now drawn for yourself. So what you want to do is you can either draw a new line, or you can simply take the final edge and just extend it out. Just remember when you extend it that you don't accidentally move that too much up or down. So try and get the average position to be correct, and make sure to get every single contour to reach, or at least to exceed out of this boundary line. So you can, as I mentioned, just drag that out or draw new lines and then just attach that together. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention here is that we have scenarios where the contours are not joined. In other words, we have a line and then there's a bit of a gap, and then the contour carries on. Now, this isn't a huge problem because in 3D Max, what we're going to do is we're going to join all of them together into one continuous spline, and then we're going to move each contour into the correct height. The problem does arrive, however, when you want to start moving your contour lines upwards. If you have a very complex site plan, you will need to now not select one contour line, but you will need to select 1, 2, 3, 4, and lastly 5 segment to that long polyline just so that you can move it up to the correct height. In other words, you have to make 5 clicks for each contour line if they are broken in this way. So there are a number of things that you can do to fix this. You can either join the vertices in 3D Max. You can also use a fillet function or a poly edit function in AutoCAD. So if you want to use the poly edit function, you just type in PE enter on your keyboard and you select one of the lines, and you'll see here you have several options to go with, and we are going to choose join, and then you just want to choose those objects that are going to be joined together, right click on your mouse, and you will now have a continuous line. So even though we haven't welded the vertices or anything, we do now have a continuous polyline that can be selected with one click. And that's really what you want to do for all of your contour lines, that every single time you move the line upwards, you only have to select one contour each time. So each contour will represent 1 meter or 1 foot. I don't know how it would be in your metric or system of measurement. So the other thing that I can mention here is that if your contour lines are too detailed, in other words, if there are too many small little fine zigzags and details, or if there are curves that have many small vertex points, you also don't want to be pulled down by that level of high detail. So what I can recommend in those cases is that you simplify it by redrawing the contours. Now remember as well that you don't have to draw every single one. If you have contours that are working at every meter, you could also draw every 5th contour line if you think that you're not going to lose too much detail. Remember that with visualization, you don't have to be 101% accurate. You can also just aggregate what the terrain is doing. The main thing is that you have your vital contour lines, for example. This one, that you have the one that meets the ocean, since that will be at 0. So you want to make sure that those key contour lines are there. And then what you do in between is really quite up to you, depending on the level of detail that you want to capture. So if I had to go and redraw this, and it is very time consuming, I must warn you, and I've done it on very large projects where I've spent hours redrawing contour lines, but there actually wasn't any way around it, because in those cases there were hundreds of tiny little fragmented zigzags and dots and lines that had to be redrawn. So what you want to do there is you want to create a new layer. For example, we can come in here and say, well, we're going to have new contours, and you will just create a new layer for that, and you will make that layer your current layer. So you will find that layer on the list here. So let me just find it there. And then you will start drawing those new contours with a single polyline. And you will see that you don't need to get all of the detail. You can just very quickly, without even zooming too far, you can start drawing those contours with just a couple of clicks. And remember that you don't need to go too far outside of this square that you've drawn for yourself. You can just end it roughly on the outside of it. So here as well, since we don't need these contours that are too far away, we can draw a new polyline, and then we can use the trim command, TR enter, to select that line, and then just right click to trim those lines away. And we can do the same thing here. We can trim that, right click, select all these lines that are crossing, and get rid of those. So here as well, just go and delete everything that you don't need, so that you're only focusing on what you do actually want to see in your model space. So that is pretty much it for the contours. The main thing to remember to keep in your mind is to bring as little necessary information as possible, and not to bear yourself down with very heavy geometry in 3D Max. So good luck with that. I know that contours are sometimes quite painstaking and they do take time, but getting a very good contour and terrain model can definitely bring some very good realism and good positioning to your model as you put it into the landscape. So good luck with all of that, and the next lesson we will look at a few final layering touch-ups that we can do to this plan before we do actually take it across into 3D Max.